Breaking news from around your world on this Wednesday, May 1st, 2019. I'm Larry Rice. American and Chinese trade negotiators met Wednesday for talks on their bruising tariff war after Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the U.S. side might be moving toward a decision on whether to make a deal with Beijing. Mnuchin and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, along with China's economic czar, Vice Premier Liu He, smiled for photos and shook hands after their one-day meeting. Beijing and Washington have cited progress on issues including intellectual property and forced technology transfer to help end a conflict marked by tit-for-tat tariffs that have cost both sides billions of dollars, disrupted supply chains, and roiled financial markets. In a statement, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said the discussions remain focused toward making substantial progress on important structural issues, and the talks would continue next week in Washington. The U.S. wants China to roll back industry development plans it says are based in part on stolen technology and that violate its market opening commitments. Mnuchin said earlier that Wednesday's meeting and talks next week in Washington would help American officials decide whether to recommend President Donald Trump agree to a deal with Beijing. Discussions between U.S. and Taliban mediators started Wednesday in Qatar with the goal of creating a lasting peace and a phased withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. The talks center around four main issues: removal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, guarantees against terrorism, peace talks between the Taliban and the pro-U.S. Afghan government, and a lasting ceasefire. Wednesday's discussions in Doha are the highest-level talks the two sides have had since the Trump administration made a push for negotiations last year. The new peace talks come 1 week after the U.S., China, and Russia met in Moscow to discuss the Afghan peace process. The U.S. State Department said last week the Taliban could be used to fight against the Islamic State terror group. One sticking point is the Taliban's refusal to recognize Afghan President Ashraf Ghani's regime, which the group views as a puppet government of the United States. The Taliban has refused to hold peace talks with Afghan officials, as the most recent planned meeting last week was called off. The clock is ticking if Afghanistan wants to reach a final agreement before national elections in September. Ghani faces tough opposition from rivals who have already started forming an interim government. The Trump administration turned its attention to Russia's role in Venezuela on Wednesday, a day after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo accused Moscow of intervening when President Nicolas Maduro was preparing to leave the country. Pompeo was scheduled to speak with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, and the White House National Security Council scheduled a meeting to discuss next steps on the political turmoil in Venezuela. Pompeo accused Russia on Tuesday of intervening when Maduro was preparing to leave the country in the face of a call by opposition leader Juan Guaido for Venezuela's military to help him oust Maduro. Earlier on Wednesday, Pompeo said during a television interview that the United States was prepared to take military action to stem the turmoil in Venezuela, but reiterated that the U.S. would prefer a peaceful transition of power. Venezuelans were expected to take to the streets on Wednesday for what Guaido pledged would be the largest march in the country's history. French police clashed with stone-throwing protesters as tens of thousands of people started marching in Paris Wednesday for May Day rallies under tight security. More than 200 arrests were made. Riot police repeatedly used tear gas and stun grenades to try and control the crowd gathering near a Paris train station for the main protest. It wasn't immediately clear how many people were injured. At least 2 men with head wounds were helped away from the scene by paramedics. Reporters saw groups of hooded, black-clad people shouting anti-police slogans, mixing with other protesters wearing yellow vests or waving union flags. Some threw rocks and other objects at police officers, attacked a parked van in a nearby street, kicking the vehicle and breaking its windows. French police ordered the closure of more than 580 shops, restaurants, and cafes on the Paris protest route, and numerous subway stations were shut. More than 7,400 police were deployed in the French capital. Yellow vests have joined the traditional May Day Union March to show their common rejection of President Emmanuel Macron's economic policies, seen as favoring the wealthier and big business. A British court on Wednesday sentenced WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange to 50 weeks in prison for jumping bail 7 years ago and taking refuge in Ecuador's London embassy. Assange, who is 47, had faced up to a year behind bars for the bail violation. Assange sought asylum from Ecuador in 2012 to avoid extradition to Sweden to face questioning on sexual assault and rape allegations. He was arrested after Ecuador's government decided he had overstayed his welcome and disrespected his hosts. Assange faces an extradition hearing in London on Thursday linked to U.S. charges that he conspired with former U.S. Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning to hack a password and steal documents from a classified government computer. The Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo has reached a grim milestone, with 27 new cases confirmed in a single day, a record for the current outbreak. The outbreak, the second deadliest in history, has proven difficult to bring under control because of community mistrust and attacks on healthcare workers. The World Health Organization said 27 new confirmed cases had been reported Sunday, the most in a single day since the outbreak started in August last year. Many deaths are taking place in the community before medical workers have reached them. Of the 27 new cases reported Sunday, 13 were already dead, according to the DRC Health Ministry. Similarly, 126 new cases had been reported in the week ending April 28th, the highest weekly total since Ebola took hold in the country. According to the latest figures from the DRC Health Ministry, 970 people have died since the outbreak began, while 412 people have been cured of Ebola. The WHO said that sporadic violence by armed militias, limited healthcare resources, and difficult-to-access locations meant this outbreak is taking place in one of the most challenging circumstances ever confronted by WHO. The White House said President Trump will meet with congressional Democratic leaders soon to discuss drug prices. The announcement came Tuesday following infrastructure talks with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer. The White House said in a statement that the three agreed to meet in the near future over the health issue and that President Trump feels there is a long way to go to lower drug costs without elaborating. The Trump administration made lower medication prices a top issue in his presidential campaign, but has yet to unveil any detailed plan since taking office in January 2017. House Democrats have launched an investigation into pharmaceutical industry pricing practices and held hearings on the issue. The Republican-led U.S. Senate has also held hearings on the issue, and its Judiciary Committee plans to hold another next week. Any legislative effort to rein in pharmaceutical costs would have to pass both chambers and win Trump's support to become law. Several drug makers temporarily froze price increases last year after criticism from Trump, but they started raising prices again at the start of this year, albeit at lower levels than in previous years. The Trump administration is asking Congress for an additional $4.5 billion in emergency spending for border security, as the administration contends with a surge of Central American migrants at the southern border. A summary of the request obtained by the AP says the White House wants $3.3 billion for humanitarian aid to increase shelter capacity for unaccompanied migrant children and the feeding and care of families. An additional $1.1 billion would go toward operational support, including personnel expenses, detention beds, transportation, and investigative work on smuggling. And the final $178 million would be used for mission support, including technology upgrades. Acting Homeland Security Secretary Kevin McAleenan said Tuesday during a congressional hearing that the department was running out of money amid a spike in migrants crossing the southern border. He told a House panel the money would be used for temporary and semi-permanent facilities to process families and children and increase detention, though he didn't specify a figure then. Nearly 100,000 migrants crossed the border in March, a 12-year high. Japan's new emperor, Naruhito, formally took the chrysanthemum throne on Wednesday, a day after his 85-year-old father, Akihito, became the first Japanese emperor to abdicate since 1817. Naruhito, who is 59, said he felt a sense of solemnity as a brief ceremony in which he received sacred imperial regalia formally marked his ascension to the throne. Naruhito is the first emperor born after World War II and is expected to continue his father's focus on atonement and humanizing the world's oldest monarchy in a country where the emperor was long seen as a living god. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe congratulated Naruhito on his ascension, pledging to create a bright future during the new era that is peaceful and full of hope. Emperor Naruhito said, "I sincerely hope for the happiness of the people and further progress of the country and for world peace." And that's your update for this Wednesday, May 1st, 2019. I'm Larry Rice. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.